"Son, this is emergency money," I whispered as he emptied my bank account right in front of me. By the time I realized it was just the first of many times, it was already too late. I always believed that a mother is for life, but I never imagined that would mean being robbed by my own son for years. He would smile while telling me he'd take care of everything, but the only thing he took care of was the money that didn't belong to him. But before I go on, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing how far our stories are reaching. It was a random Tuesday afternoon when I heard the words that changed my life forever. David, my 37-year-old son, was sitting at my kitchen table sipping the coffee I had just poured. The sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the first gray hairs at his temples, something he inherited from me, his 65-year-old mother. "Mom," he said in that calm, controlled voice he always used when he wanted something, "I've been thinking. Starting with your next paycheck, we're going to transfer all your money to my account. I'll manage everything for you." My cup stopped in midair. I looked at him, trying to process what I had just heard. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration, as if it were already decided. "What do you mean you'll manage everything, David?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's simple." He smiled, that smile he'd used since he was a boy when he wanted to convince me of something. "You're 65 now. You've worked your whole life. Now you need to rest and not worry about accounts, bills, financial management. I'll take care of all that for you." I lowered my cup slowly. 40 years working as a nurse in public hospitals, raising a son alone after my husband left us when David was only 3. 40 years saving every possible penny. Living in apartments that were too small, wearing clothes until they faded, all to ensure my son had what I never had. A quality education, good clothes, a life without the hardships I knew. "I don't know, son. I've always managed my own money." "Exactly, Mom. You've always worked so hard. Now it's time for you to rest," he insisted, placing his hand over mine. "Let me handle this. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." His words sounded beautiful, maybe even sincere. But something inside me, a small, distant voice, was screaming a warning. Why now? Why everything? My pension wasn't huge, but I had managed to save a good amount of money over the years. I had my own house, small but comfortable, and some savings. "I'll think about it," I finally replied. "There's not much to think about, Mom," he said, and for a moment a flash of irritation crossed his face before the smile returned. "It's for your own good, trust me." David left that afternoon, leaving behind an envelope with bank documents for me to sign, documents that would give him unrestricted access to my accounts. I spent hours staring at those papers with a heart heavy with doubt. That's when I started to remember little things, how David, who earned 4 times my pension, never brought anything when he came for dinner every Friday with his wife. How he had asked to borrow money several times in recent years without ever paying it back. How his house bought 2 years ago had expensive furniture that I knew his salary alone couldn't afford. That night, I did something I had never done before. I took all my bank statements from the last 6 months and started analyzing them line by line. And there it was, a withdrawal of $1,800 at a branch on the other side of town, made on a day I was working at the hospital. A withdrawal I had never made. My heart raced as I kept searching. Another unknown withdrawal 2 months earlier. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I grabbed my wallet. My debit card was there as always. Then I remembered. 3 months earlier, David had asked to borrow my purse for a few minutes while I was in the shower, saying he needed to check a prescription I had written down. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. My own son was stealing from me. The next morning, I went to the bank as soon as it opened. The young manager, not much older than David, looked at me with a mixture of compassion and discomfort as I explained the situation. "Mrs. Linda, this happens more than you can imagine," she said softly. "Family fraud is very common, especially against the elderly. Do you want to file a formal complaint?" A formal complaint against my own son, the boy I held on feverish nights, for whom I sewed superhero costumes, whom I fiercely defended from the injustices of the world. No, I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. For now, I just want to change all my passwords and request new cards. And I hesitated. I'd like to check if there are any other accounts or loans in my name. The investigation revealed what I feared most: a credit card I had never applied for with a debt of $7,500, an electricity bill for an address that wasn't mine, the address of David's house, and the worst part, a $15,000 loan in my name taken out a year ago, which had seriously damaged my credit history. I left the bank feeling like I had aged 10 years that morning. I walked aimlessly through the streets, trying to understand how the child I had raised, whom I loved more than myself, had turned into this stranger who stole from his own mother. When David called that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. His message was clear. "Mom, I'll stop by tonight to pick up the signed documents. I've already arranged for the transfer to start next month." That's when I made my decision. I spent the rest of the day making calls to a moving company, to a lawyer recommended by the bank manager, and finally to a real estate agency. The next morning, when David arrived at my house for the Friday dinner, he never missed. After all, it was free home-cooked food. I was the one who surprised him. The house was completely empty. David stood frozen in the living room doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. His wife Vanessa peered over his shoulder, her eyes wide. "Mom, what happened? Where's the furniture? Where's the TV?" His voice wavered between concern and accusation. I was sitting in the only chair left in the house, a kitchen chair strategically placed in the center of the empty living room. I smiled calmly, something I hadn't truly done in a long time. "I sold them," I replied simply. "Sold them? What do you mean you sold them? Why?" David strode into the room looking around as if the furniture might be hidden somewhere. "I needed the money," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "If you're going to manage my finances, I thought it would be best to make sure I have some cash on hand first." The confusion on his face quickly turned to fury, a kind of rage I had never seen in him before, raw, uncontrolled, terrifying. For a moment I was afraid of my own son. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. "How are we supposed to watch TV when we come for dinner? How are we supposed to be comfortable here?" Those words were like a bolt of lightning. How are we supposed to be comfortable here? Not, how are you going to be comfortable, Mom? It was about their comfort, not mine. My house, my belongings, existed only for their convenience. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels clicking on the now exposed wooden floor. "Linda, this is ridiculous. We come here every Friday to keep you company to make sure you're okay. And this is how you repay us." Selfish. The unspoken word hung in the air between us. I, the woman who had given up her own life so David could have everything. The woman who for 37 years put his needs before her own. The woman who had worked double shifts to pay for his college. Selfish. "Dinner isn't ready," I said calmly. "In fact, there is no dinner today. If you're hungry, you can go eat somewhere else." The silence that followed was heavy. David stared at me as if I were a stranger. And maybe I was. A version of me he had never met. That I myself was only just beginning to know. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing," David said finally, his voice cold and calculating. "A woman your age alone without a family that truly cares for her. It can end very badly. I'm all you have, Mom. You should remember that." The threat was poorly disguised, but instead of scaring me, it only confirmed what I already suspected. This was no longer the child I raised. This was a man who saw his own mother as a resource to be exploited, a convenience, a bank account. They left slamming the door. I heard the car start with a roar of the engine, and then finally alone, I let out a long breath I didn't even realize I was holding. In that moment of absolute silence, in a house empty of furniture but full of memories, I began to understand how deeply I had been betrayed. It wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the love, the sacred relationship between a mother and son. The following week, David tried to call me several times. I ignored every call. Instead, I followed the advice of the lawyer I had consulted. First, I documented everything. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every fraudulent account, every penny that had been taken from me without my knowledge. The total took my breath away. $32,000 over 3 years. To some it may not seem like much, but for me it represented years of careful saving, of daily sacrifices, of choosing between needs because I couldn't have it all. As I organized the evidence, I relived our history, mine and David's. The day he was born, red and furious, as if protesting his arrival into the world. The nights I worked the late shift at the hospital, leaving him with a neighbor, because I had no other choice. The sacrifice of turning down a second marriage because the suitor wouldn't accept raising another man's child. The years we shared a one-room apartment, sleeping in the same bed until he was 8 because we couldn't afford more space. I remembered the expensive sneakers he begged for in high school, which cost half my monthly salary, but which I bought because I didn't want him to feel inferior to his peers. The private university I financed with a loan that took me 10 years to pay off. The 5 years after his graduation, when he continued to live with me without contributing a single cent, saving his money while I paid for everything. And how he repaid all those sacrifices. By stealing from me as I began to get older, treating me like a free restaurant on Fridays, planning to take complete control of the little I had managed to save. A week after the confrontation, David showed up unannounced. He was calmer this time, with that rehearsed smile he used when he wanted to manipulate me. "Mom, let's talk like adults," he said. "You sold all the furniture on impulse. You're clearly making bad decisions. This only proves you need my help." I looked at him, really looked at him, in a way I hadn't in a long time. I saw the vanity in his eyes, the expensive clothes, the luxury watch on his wrist. I saw the man he had become, not because of my sacrifices, but in spite of them. "David," I said calmly, "I know about the withdrawals. I know about the credit card. I know about the electric bill. I know everything." The smile instantly vanished from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, but his voice trembled slightly. "I have all the documents. I've spoken to a lawyer. What you did is fraud, David. It's a crime." He turned pale. "You wouldn't do this to me. I'm your son. Yes, you are my son. And because you're my son, I'm going to give you a choice you didn't give me. Either you pay back all the money you took from me with interest, or I go to the police." His reaction was predictable. First denial, then anger. Finally, when he realized I wouldn't back down poorly veiled threats. "You're going to regret this. No one will believe you. They'll think you're senile, confused." I smiled a sad smile. "I have all the statements, David. I have recordings of my conversations at the bank. I have documented proof of every cent you took from me. It's not my word against yours. It's you against the evidence." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard I thought it would break. But this time I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel scared. I felt strong. In the days that followed, David launched a smear campaign against me. He posted on social media about how his elderly mother was getting confused, how he was only trying to help, and how painful it was to watch someone you love lose their ability to make decisions. His friends, and even some neighbors who had known him since he was a child, expressed solidarity, offering him support during this difficult time. No one asked for my side of the story. That's when I decided it was time to stop being silent, to stop being the long-suffering mother who accepts everything in the name of love. It was time to fight. The first step was to file a formal complaint with the bank. The second, to initiate legal proceedings for fraud. And the third, the hardest, was to do something I never imagined I would do, to publicly expose what David had done. While I dealt with the legal procedures, I transferred the money from the sale of the furniture to a new account at another bank. I rented a small apartment in another neighborhood, far from David and the painful memories. And for the first time in my life, I began to think about myself. What did I want for the rest of my life? What kind of future could I build now at 65, starting practically from scratch? The answer came from a brochure in the lawyer's waiting room. "It's never too late to start over." It was an ad for an entrepreneurship program for senior citizens. I looked at that colorful piece of paper for a long time. Start over. A phrase I never thought would be part of my life at this age. The 3 months that followed were the most intense and transformative of my life. While the legal process against David moved slowly, I decided I wouldn't wait around. If I was starting a new phase of my life, I would do it with purpose and determination. I enrolled in the entrepreneurship program. On the first day, I sat in the back row of a room full of people my age or older. People with smile lines that told stories of full lives, but who, like me, were there because they believed there was still more to live and create. "Why are you here?" asked the instructor, a middle-aged man with contagious enthusiasm. When it was my turn, the words came out before I could filter them. Because I discovered I raised a thief, not a son, and now I need to find out who I am, besides being his mother. There was a moment of shocked silence, followed by something unexpected applause, looks of understanding, nods of solidarity. In that instant, I realized I wasn't alone. Many there were starting over, after betrayals, losses, disappointments. During the classes, I rediscovered a passion I had left dormant for decades. When I was young, before David was born, I loved making homemade sweets. My grandmother, a strong-willed Portuguese woman with skilled hands, had taught me traditional recipes that I perfected over the years. But when life became a constant struggle to survive as a single mother, that joy was replaced by necessity. With encouragement from the instructors and my classmates, I started making sweets again. First, just to share in class, then accepting small orders. The custard tarts, little Portuguese cream tarts, chocolate truffles, the famous Brazilian brigadeiros, and coconut flanes, the Brazilian quindens, that came from my hands were more than desserts. They were declarations of independence. Every sale, no matter how small, represented something that was completely mine, something David couldn't take from me because it came from my skills, my creativity, my work. Meanwhile, the legal process revealed more layers of David's betrayal. The lawyer discovered that he had used my name as a guarantor on a loan to renovate his house without my knowledge, that he had made online purchases with cards registered in my name, that he had systematically abused my trust in ways I never even imagined possible. The evidence was irrefutable, and finally David's lawyers suggested a settlement. He would return the $32,000 he had taken from me, plus $10,000 for emotional damages, and publicly admit what he had done, clearing my name and credit history. When I received the news, I was in the community kitchen I rented to make my sweets on a larger scale. My hands were covered in flour, and the smell of cinnamon and lemon filled the air. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because justice would be served, sadness because no amount of money could repair the broken bond between a mother and son. The night before signing the agreement, I received a call from David. After weeks of ignoring his attempts to contact me, I decided to answer. His voice sounded different, lower, without the usual arrogance. "Mom, can we talk before tomorrow? Just the two of us." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to believe he was genuinely sorry, that the son I had raised, whom I loved despite everything, was still there somewhere inside this man who had betrayed me. "About what, David?" "About us. About rebuilding. I know I did terrible things, but you're my mother. There will always be an us. Isn't that right?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words. For almost 4 decades, us meant my needs came after his, that my dreams could wait, that my life existed in service of his. "No, David," I finally replied. "There is no us anymore. There is you who needs to deal with the consequences of your choices, and there is me who is finally learning to live for myself." He started to protest, to beg, to manipulate, as he always did. But something had changed in me. His words no longer had power over my heart or my decisions. "We'll see each other at the lawyer's office tomorrow. Good night, David." I hung up and went back to rolling out my custard tarts. Each methodical movement stretching the dough, cutting the perfect circles, preparing the creamy filling was an affirmation. Each finished sweet was a tangible reminder of what I could create with my own hands. The next morning I signed the agreement without shedding a tear. David avoided my gaze throughout the entire meeting, answering only in monosyllables when his lawyer asked him questions. His wife, Vanessa, did not show up. When it was all over and the lawyer stepped out to make copies of the documents, we were left alone in the meeting room for a few minutes. A heavy silence hung between us. "Why did you do this, David?" I finally asked, not with anger or accusation, but with genuine curiosity. "You had a good job, a nice house. Why steal from your own mother?" He looked down, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I don't know," he mumbled. "At first it was just once. I needed to make the down payment on the house and was short on cash. I planned to pay it back, but then it got easy. You never asked, you never checked." The cruel simplicity of his answer hit me like a slap. I never asked, I never checked, because I trusted him unconditionally, because he was my son. "And the Friday dinners, why did you come every week if you didn't even like spending time with me?" He shrugged an indifferent gesture that told me everything I needed to know. It was convenient. It was free. It was a habit that benefited him, not me. When I left the office that day with a substantial check and the promise that my name would be cleared, I didn't feel the victory I expected, but I felt something just as powerful: freedom. Freedom from the weight of disappointment, of betrayal, of false hopes. In the following months, my small, homemade sweets business grew beyond my wildest dreams. I started by selling at local fairs, then to neighborhood cafes. I created a social media page that surprisingly gained followers quickly, especially after a local influencer tried my custard tarts and declared them the best in the city. With the settlement money and the growing profits from the sweets, I managed to buy a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood near the sea. Nothing fancy, but completely mine. I decorated it with simple but cozy furniture, vibrant colors I always wanted to use but never allowed myself, and a kitchen equipped with everything I needed for my new craft. David tried to contact me a few times after the settlement. He sent gifts on my birthday messages on Christmas and New Year's. I responded with distant politeness, maintaining a clear and impassable boundary. Some friends and family didn't understand my decision to keep my distance. "But he's your son," they'd say with astonishment. "Family is forever." I would just smile and reply, "Yes, he's my son, and he always will be. But love doesn't mean allowing abuse. Love also includes respect and boundaries." On a Sunday afternoon, while I was preparing a special order for a client's wedding, I received an unexpected visit. Vanessa was at my door without David, looking awkward and out of place in her elegant suit in my simple building. "Can I come in?" she asked without the arrogant tone I remembered. I hesitated, but curiosity won. I invited her into the living room, offered her coffee, which she declined. "I came because I think you should know," she began, looking at her own hands. "David and I are separating." The news didn't surprise me as much as it should have. "I'm sorry," I replied, because it seemed like the right thing to say. "Don't be." She gave me a sad smile. "I found out I wasn't the only one being deceived. There were other women's secret accounts, lies about his job, about money, about everything." I nodded silently. The pattern was familiar. "I came because I wanted you to know you were right to walk away," she continued. "At the time, I thought you were being cruel, that you were exaggerating, but now I get it." Somehow, that acknowledgement from someone who had participated in the Friday dinners, who had called me selfish, brought a validation I didn't know I needed. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. Before she left, Vanessa stopped and looked at the boxes of sweets prepared on my counter. "You seem happy," she observed. "I am," I replied, realizing the truth in the words as I said them. Not in the way I imagined I'd be at 65, but I am. After she left, I went back to my kitchen and continued working on the wedding sweets. Every movement was precise. Every sweet was perfect, like the life I was building. Not perfect in the conventional sense, but perfect for me. In the evening, I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, listening to the distant sound of the waves and savoring one of my custard tarts with a cup of tea. I watched the sky turn shades of orange and pink, the first stars appearing shyly. I thought of the young mother I once was, holding a baby in her arms and dreams in her heart. I thought of the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the skipped meals, so David could have everything. And I thought of the woman I was now, wiser, stronger, and finally truly free. A year passed since signing the agreement with David. Fall had arrived again, bringing with it cooler winds and golden leaves that danced along the city sidewalks. My small sweets business had grown beyond my most optimistic expectations. Linda's Sweets was no longer just a social media page or a stall at local fairs. Now it had its own space, a small shop in the city center with large glass windows that let in the sunlight, illuminating the display cases filled with tempting colors and textures. That Monday morning, as I was preparing the dough for a new batch of custard tarts, the doorbell rang. It was too early for customers. I usually didn't open until 10. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer. To my surprise, it was Martha, my lifelong neighbor from the old neighborhood. I hadn't seen her since I moved almost a year ago. "Linda!" she exclaimed, opening her arms for a hug. "I finally found you. The place is beautiful." I returned the hug, genuinely happy to see her. Martha had been one of the few people who didn't take sides when the situation with David became public. Come in, come in." I invited, leading her to the small coffee area at the back of the shop. "I was just making some coffee. Want a cup? And I have some fresh tarts from yesterday." As we ate and drank, Martha caught me up on the neighborhood news, the little gossip about common neighbors, the new bakery that had opened where the hardware store used to be. It was strange how that world seemed simultaneously familiar and distant, like a movie you saw a long time ago and only vaguely remember. "And David?" she finally asked, her voice lowering slightly. "Did you hear?" I shook my head. "We don't keep in touch," I answered honestly. "I heard from Vanessa that he sold the house after the divorce, moved to another city, started a new job. Other than that, I don't know anything else." Martha nodded, understanding. "It must have been hard cutting ties with your own son." "It was the hardest decision of my life," I admitted, looking out the window at the passers-by on the sidewalk. "But it was also the most necessary. Sometimes we need to remove toxic people from our lives, even when they're family. Especially when they're family, because the damage is greater." "You seem different, Linda," Martha observed. "Lighter, more confident." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. "It's because I finally understood that I deserve more than scraps. I spent my whole life putting myself second. First, it was out of necessity. Raising a son alone didn't leave me a choice. Then it became a habit. And then it became a trap." "A trap?" "Yes, the trap of believing that love means constant sacrifice, that being a good mother means having no boundaries, that getting older means accepting any crumb of attention from your children, even when it comes with abuse." Martha took a sip of coffee, thoughtful. "A lot of us fall into that trap. I myself—" She was interrupted by the chime of the door. A young woman entered, looking around curiously. "Excuse me," I said, getting up. "I need to help her." The customer was a bride looking for sweets for her wedding. As we talked about flavors and quantities, I noticed Martha watching me with a smile. When I finished with the customer who left, promising to return with the confirmed order, Martha came over. "You found your place in the world," she said. It wasn't a question. I found it, I confirmed. At 66 years old. Who would have thought? After Martha left, I went back to the kitchen and continued preparing the sweets for the day. Each movement was familiar now, almost meditative. As I worked, I reflected on the journey of the last year. It hadn't been easy. There were nights I woke up crying, feeling David's absence like a hole in my chest. There were moments I almost called him, almost gave in to the old need to keep the peace at all costs. There were days I questioned if I was being too harsh, if I should give him another chance. But then I remembered the bank statements, the fraudulent accounts, the calculated coldness with which he had planned to take complete control of my finances, and the determination returned. The first month after the settlement was the hardest. I used part of the money to rent a space in the community kitchen where I produced my sweets 3 times a week. In the first few weeks, I was spending more than I was making. I started to think I had made a terrible mistake, that I was too old to start over. It was Celeste, an 80-year-old woman who also used the community kitchen to make preserves, who gave me the perspective I needed. "Linda, how old are you? 65. "Pfft," she snorted, adjusting her glasses on the tip of her nose. "You could live another 20, 30 years. Are you going to spend all that time regretting what you lost, or are you going to build something new?" Her words, direct and unsentimental, were exactly what I needed to hear. The following week, I invested in better packaging, created business cards, and started promoting my work more actively. The turning point came when Teresa, the owner of a charming cafe downtown, tried my custard tarts. She not only placed an order for her shop, but invited me to participate in a local food festival. It was there that my sweets caught the attention of more people, including the aforementioned local influencer who promoted them to her followers. The orders started pouring in. First a few a week, then several a day. Within 6 months, I was able to rent my own space, this little shop that was now my sanctuary and my livelihood. The chime of the door brought me back to the present. More customers had arrived. The morning turned into afternoon, and the afternoon into early evening before I knew it. When I finally turned the sign from open to closed, I felt the pleasant exhaustion of a productive day. I walked home as I did every day. My apartment was a 15-minute walk from the shop, a perfect distance to stretch my legs and organize my thoughts. The path led through a small square where seniors played dominoes and children played under the supervision of nannies and grandparents. Sometimes watching those families, I felt a pang of sadness. I wondered if I would ever have grandchildren, if David would start his own family, if we would one day reconcile. But then I remembered that life doesn't follow scripts, that sometimes the stories we imagine for ourselves need to be rewritten, that happy endings aren't always like in fairy tales. My happy ending was being written now, little by little, day by day. It was in the smiles of customers tasting my sweets, in the friendships I made with suppliers and other local merchants, in the freedom to make my own decisions, big or small, without having to consider anyone's expectations or manipulations. When I got home, I found an envelope in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name and address in a handwriting I recognized immediately. David's handwriting. For a moment, I stood in the building's entrance, staring at the envelope, as if it were something alive and potentially dangerous. A part of me wanted to tear it up without reading it. Another part yearned for news of him, for some sign of true remorse. I went up to my apartment and placed the envelope on the kitchen table. I made tea, took a bath, ate a light meal. All the while, the envelope remained there like a silent visitor awaiting attention. Finally, I sat down and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and an old photo. Me holding baby David in my arms, smiling at the camera with that mix of exhaustion and joy that only new mothers know. The letter was short. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness or even a reply. I just wanted you to know that I started therapy 6 months ago. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I hurt the person who sacrificed the most for me. The therapist says I have a long road ahead. That rebuilding trust, if it's ever possible, takes years, not months. That first I need to become someone worthy of trust. I saw your shop on social media. It looks amazing. I always knew you made the best sweets in the world. I'm proud of you even though I have no right to feel that way. David." I read the letter several times, trying to find the hidden manipulation, the secret agenda. But surprisingly, there seemed to be none. No requests, no attempts to justify, no implicit plea for reconciliation. I put the letter in the drawer where I kept important documents. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But something changed that night. A small knot of bitterness I didn't even know I was carrying began to unravel. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was simply the acknowledgement that people can change, that the future remains unwritten, that life continues to surprise even at 66. The following spring, my small business faced a wonderful dilemma. It was growing too fast. I could no longer handle all the orders by myself, especially after I started supplying 3 cafes and a deli. For the first time in my life, I needed to hire help. The idea made me nervous. Being a boss had never been part of my life plan. As a nurse, I was always subordinate to doctors and supervisors. As a mother, my role was to care, not to lead. "You're overthinking it," Teresa said during our weekly breakfast at her cafe. This routine had started a few months ago and had become an anchor in our busy weeks. "Hire someone, teach them your recipes, delegate." "My recipes are all I have," I confessed, stirring my coffee distractedly. What if the person isn't trustworthy? What if they steal my formulas and open a competing business? Teresa laughed, shaking her head. First, that's unlikely. Second, even if it happens, nobody makes sweets like you, Linda. There's something special in your creations that goes beyond the recipes. She was right, of course. She always was. Teresa, at 50, with 2 decades of experience as an entrepreneur, had become not just a business partner, but a mentor and a friend. She was the one who helped me understand contracts, pricing, inventory management, aspects of the business I was completely unfamiliar with. A few days after that conversation, I put a small sign in the window. Pastry assistant wanted. Experience desirable, but not required. A passion for sweets is essential. I interviewed 5 candidates. They all seemed suitable. But something about Julia, a 23-year-old recent culinary school graduate, caught my attention. Maybe it was her genuine enthusiasm, the way her eyes lit up when she tasted my sweets, or the story she shared about learning to make chocolate truffles with her grandmother when she was 6. "Why do you want to work in a small shop like mine?" I asked her. "With your degree, you could try for bigger restaurants, hotels." "Precisely because it's small," she answered promptly. "I want to learn from someone who puts their heart into what they do. In big places, I'll just be another person on the production line." I hired her that same day. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Julia brought more than just practical help to the shop. She brought new ideas, youthful energy, technical knowledge that complemented my intuitive experience. While I mastered the classics, custard tarts, coconut flans, chocolate truffles, she suggested contemporary fusions and innovative presentations that attracted a younger clientele. Our partnership flourished in unexpected ways. I taught her the secrets of the traditional recipes passed down through generations in my family. She showed me how to use social media more effectively, how to take photos that highlighted the beauty of the sweets, how to create content that engaged followers. "Linda, we need to make a video of you preparing custard tarts," she insisted one morning. "People love to see the process, especially when it's someone with your experience showing traditional techniques." "A video of me? Nobody wants to see a white-haired lady making sweets," I protested, half laughing, half serious. "You don't get it." Julia shook her head. "That's exactly what people want to see. Authenticity, history, real skill. They're tired of perfect influencers who barely know how to crack an egg." Reluctantly, I let her film. The video, edited with soft music and explanatory captions, surpassed 5,000 views in 2 days. The comments were overflowing with admiration questions about techniques and surprisingly personal stories from people remembering their own grandmothers and mothers in the kitchen. "See?" Julia smiled triumphantly. "You're not just a pastry chef, you're a storyteller through sweets." That idea that my sweets were stories, that each recipe carried memories and traditions, resonated deeply with me. I started including small cards with the orders telling the origin of each sweet, how I learned to make it, what memories it evoked. Customers loved this extra dimension. Many came back not just for the flavors, but for the stories, for the connection to something authentic in an increasingly artificial world. 6 months after hiring Julia, we expanded the business. We rented the space next to the original shop and transformed it into a small cafe area where customers could enjoy the sweets with coffee or tea. We hired 2 more people, a young man to wait tables, and a retired woman who, like me, had found a second career in baking. My routine changed. Now, instead of making all the sweets myself, I supervised a small team. Instead of worrying if I'd have enough customers, I worried if we could serve everyone. Instead of the fear of failure, I faced the challenge of success. On a particularly busy afternoon, as we were preparing a large order for a wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen teaching the new employee how to make the perfect cream for the custard tarts when Julia came to get me. "Linda, there's a man asking for you. He said he's your son." My heart stopped for a second. It had been almost 2 years since the confrontation with David, a year and a half since the legal settlement, a year since his letter which I never answered. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied automatically, the old caution resurfacing. Julia hesitated. "He seems nervous. He said he just wants 5 minutes." I took a deep breath, trying to decide what to do. A part of me wanted to hide in the kitchen, protected by the pots and the employees. Another part, the stronger one, knew I couldn't run forever. "Tell him I'll meet him in the cafe in 5 minutes." I used that time to compose myself. I washed my hands, took off my apron, fixed my now completely white hair. I glanced at myself briefly in the small mirror in the employee restroom. The face looking back at me was that of an older woman. Yes, but also more confident, more serene than the person I was 2 years ago. David was sitting at a corner table looking nervously out the window. He seemed thinner, older. There was something different about him that I couldn't immediately identify. "Hello, David," I said, sitting across from him. He looked at me, and I saw the surprise in his eyes. Was he expecting the submissive mother from before? The woman who accepted everything, who never stood up for herself, who lived for him, Mom. He began, his voice slightly shaky. "You look different." "I am?" I nodded. "What do you want, David?" He seemed momentarily thrown off by my directness. The old David would have immediately taken control of the conversation, dictated the terms, subtly manipulated. This David seemed unsure. "I wanted to see you," he finally replied. "To know how you are. The place, but it's incredible. I never imagined that I would be capable of building something like this." I finished when he left the sentence hanging. "That's not it," he said quickly. "It's just, you always seemed so tired, so resigned to life. Now you seem alive." He nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Yes, alive." We sat in silence for a moment. Julia appeared, bringing 2 cups of coffee and a plate with a selection of my sweets. "On the house," she said with a smile. But her eyes silently asked if I was okay. I gave her a slight nod. "I'm still in therapy," David said after she left. 2 years now. It's been hard, confronting who I am, what I did, why I did it." "And why did you do it?" I asked the question that had tormented me for years. He stared into his coffee as if the answers might be floating on the dark surface. "At first it was just convenience. You were there available. You never asked questions. Later it became a kind of entitlement in my head, as if everything you had was partially mine by birthright." The raw honesty of those words hurt, but it also brought a strange kind of release. Finally, the truth, without excuses or manipulation. "The therapist says I have narcissistic traits," he continued, "that I grew up believing the world that you existed to serve me, that I never developed real empathy." I nodded, realizing it made sense. It explained so much. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," he said, surprising me. "I know some things are beyond forgiveness. I came because part of my therapeutic process is to make amends where possible. And I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change, that I recognize the damage I caused." I looked at him with new eyes. This wasn't the David I knew. Arrogant, manipulative, always with an angle, always with a hidden agenda. This man seemed more human, fallible, and aware of his failings. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said finally. "I really am." "Thank you," he replied, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. "I didn't expect anything from you, not even for you to see me, but I wanted to say in person that I'm sorry for everything." In that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't reconciliation. Maybe it never would be. But it was a mutual acknowledgement that we were both changing, growing, finding new paths. "Your sweets have always been the best," he said, trying a coconut flan. "I remember you used to make them on Sunday nights when I was little." The comment evoked a long-forgotten memory. 6-year-old David sitting on the kitchen counter licking the wooden spoon while I finished the dessert. A simple moment of motherly connection before life got complicated. Before money status and expectations distorted our relationship. "Do you want to see the kitchen?" I offered impulsively. "See how we do it now?" His eyes lit up with genuine surprise and interest. "I'd love that." I took him to the back of my little empire. I introduced him to the team, showed him the new equipment, explained the production process we had developed. He observed everything with a respect he had never before shown for my work or my skills. "You've built something incredible here, Mom," he said when we returned to the cafe. I'm proud of you." The words seemed sincere, devoid of the condescension I would have detected before. "Thank you," I replied, and then on impulse I added, "If you want, you can come back sometime, for a coffee, to talk." It wasn't an invitation to resume our old relationship. It was the possibility of perhaps building something new, something based on mutual respect, not exploitation, on healthy boundaries, not unilateral sacrifice. "I'd like that," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. When we said goodbye at the shop door, there were no dramatic hugs or grand promises, just a silent acknowledgement that the past couldn't be changed, but the future remained open. I went back to the kitchen to the dough waiting to be rolled to the creams that needed to be whipped to the life I had built from scratch with my own hands at 66 years of age. "Is everything okay, Linda?" Julia asked, concern evident on her young face. I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't expected to find today. "Yes," I replied, picking up the rolling pin. "Everything is okay." And it was true. For the first time in a long time, I was truly okay. Not because everything was perfect, or because all the wounds had healed, but because I finally understood that my life, my worth, my happiness never depended on the approval or love of another person, not even my son. The real liberation wasn't in cutting David out of my life forever, nor in unconditionally forgiving and pretending nothing had happened. It was in the ability to set healthy boundaries, to demand respect, to put my well-being first after decades of putting it last. As I worked the pastry dough, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the betrayal that, however painful, forced me to wake up. That pushed me out of my comfort zone, out of maternal self-sacrifice, and into a life where I finally allowed myself to dream, to create, to thrive. "You know something, Julia," I said, looking at my young assistant. "I think it's time for us to expand again. What do you think about starting to offer pastry classes, to share not just the recipes, but the stories behind them?" Her eyes sparkled. "That would be perfect, Linda. People would love to learn from you." I smiled, already imagining what it would be like. A new direction, a new chapter, a new way to leave my mark on the world, not just as a mother, but as a woman, as a creator, as the owner of my own story. In the 3 years that followed that unexpected visit from David, my life expanded in ways I never could have imagined at 65, when I was still living in the shadow of sacrificial motherhood and financial exploitation. Linda's Sweets was no longer just a shop. It had become an institution in the city. In addition to the original space and the cafe, we now had a small studio where I taught pastry classes twice a week. The classes, initially an experiment, became so popular that there was a 3-month waiting list. Who would have thought that at 69 I'd be an influencer? I joked with Teresa during our weekly coffee, now a sacred tradition. "My granddaughter says I'm going viral," Teresa laughed. "You always underestimate the effect you have on people, Linda. It's not just the sweets that draw them in. It's you, your story, your authenticity." Granddaughter. The word still sounded strange and wonderful to me. Sophia, a 4-year-old girl with the same intense brown eyes as David, had entered my life 2 years ago when my son called to say his girlfriend was pregnant. "I'm not asking for anything," he had told me, his voice hesitant on the phone. "I just thought you should know if you want to be a part of her life in some way." I went to meet Sophia when she was 3 months old. I remember perfectly holding that tiny bundle, looking at the face that combined David's features with the unknown characteristics of her mother, Marianne. I remember the baby smell, the texture of impossibly soft skin, the way her tiny fingers closed around my index finger. "Hello, Sophia," I whispered. "I'm your grandma." Our relationship developed slowly, with occasional visits, always respecting the boundaries I had established with David. I would never again allow anyone, not even this innocent child, to define me exclusively by what I could give or do for them. The relationship with David remained complex. There were moments of genuine connection, like when he helped me solve a problem with the shop's refrigeration system, or when we shared memories of his childhood over lunch. And there were moments of tension, old dynamics trying to reemerge, when I needed to firmly remind him of the new terms of our relationship. "You're never going to trust me completely, are you?" he asked once after I gently declined his offer to help with the shop's accounting. Trust once broken is never fully restored, I replied honestly. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new, something different. He nodded, accepting this new reality. Our relationship was now like a bridge carefully rebuilt after a disaster, functional but with visible scars with clear limits on the weight and load it could bear. That spring morning, as I chatted with Teresa, my thoughts drifted to the future. At 69, I was once again facing decisions I never expected to have to make. Julia wants to become a partner, I confessed to Teresa. She presented a well-detailed business plan. Expansion to a second store, a line of packaged products for supermarkets, even a small recipe book. "And what do you think?" Teresa asked, always direct. "I'm scared," I admitted. Scared of losing control of what I've built. Scared that if I give up any part of it, someone might try to take it all away from me again. Teresa reached out and squeezed my hand. "Linda, what happened with David was a specific betrayal, not a universal rule. Julia has proven her worth and loyalty for years." "I know," I sighed. "Rationally, I know. But the fear—" I left the sentence unfinished. "The fear is understandable, but don't let it limit the potential of what you've created." Pshon! That conversation stayed with me as I returned to the shop preparing for a pastry class. The studio was already full, 12 people of various ages, from teenagers to seniors, all eager to learn how to make perfect coconut flans. As I taught, watching concentrated faces, clumsy hands trying to replicate my precise movements, I realized something important. What I had built was no longer just mine. It was bigger than me. It had become a community, a tradition, a meeting point between generations. After the class, I called Julia into my small office at the back of the shop. She entered looking nervous, probably expecting an answer to her partnership plan. "I want to show you something," I said, opening a drawer and taking out an old notebook with a worn leather cover and yellowed pages. "What is this?" she asked, sitting across from me. "My grandmother's recipes," I explained, opening the notebook carefully. "Handwritten, some over 100-years-old recipes that came from Portugal, that survived wars, migrations, poverty." Julia looked at the notebook with reverence, understanding its historical and sentimental value. "I've never shown this to anyone," I continued, "not even David. It was my treasure, my secret. But I realized that guarded secrets die with us. Unshared traditions disappear." "Linda," she began, but I cut her off with a gesture. "I accept your partnership proposal with some conditions. We can discuss the details later. But I want you to understand something. I'm entrusting you not just with a business, but with a legacy. These recipes, these stories are part of who I am, part of who you will become too, if we continue on this path together." Her eyes filled with tears. "I promise to honor this. I promise to care for this legacy as if it were my own." When she left the office, I was left alone with my thoughts. I had just made a decision that would change the course of the business I built from scratch. I was giving up absolute control, trusting someone again. The idea still scared me, but in a different way. It was the healthy fear that accompanies any big change, not the paralyzing fear born of trauma. That night, sitting on my apartment balcony, I reflected on the journey of the last 4 years. From the submissive, exploited woman to the respected entrepreneur. From the mother who lived only for her son to the multifaceted human being with her own purposes and dreams. From fear to courage. From loneliness to community. The following Sunday, David brought Sophia to spend the afternoon with me. We had established this monthly routine, not too frequent to overwhelm me, not so rare that Sophia wouldn't recognize me. A balance that worked for all of us. "Grandma, can we make sweets?" Sophia asked as soon as she arrived, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Of course, my love. Today we're going to make chocolate truffles. How does that sound?" As we prepared the sweets together, me at the counter and her on a small stool to reach the height, David watched from the kitchen doorway. There was something different in his gaze. It was no longer the expectation of receiving, but the joy of witnessing. "She talks about you all the time," he commented when Sophia went to wash her hands. "About Grandma's sweets, about Grandma's stories. You're her favorite person." I smiled, feeling the warmth of that comment. "She's very special to me, too." "I'm glad you have that relationship," he said, hesitating before continuing. "A better relationship than ours was." The frankness surprised me. "Different," I corrected gently. "Not better or worse, just different." David nodded, understanding. "You know what impresses me most about all this?" He gestured, encompassing my kitchen, the shop, my new life. "It's not the success itself, though it's remarkable. It's that you built all this after 65, when most people think it's too late to start over." "It's never too late to live authentically," I replied. "Lost time is lost, but the time that remains is a gift." He mulled that over for a moment. "My therapist says something similar, that we should stop lamenting the past we can't change and focus on the future we can still create." "Your therapist sounds wise," I smiled. Sophia returned, interrupting our conversation with demands for more chocolate. As I helped her roll the small truffle balls between her hands, I thought about the deeper meaning of what was happening. 3 generations in the same kitchen, a tradition being passed on not just of recipes, but of values, hard work, creativity, independence, resilience, and also healthy boundaries, mutual respect, clear expectations, lessons I hadn't managed to teach my son, but which I might be able to help instill in my granddaughter. The following week, Julia and I signed the partnership papers, 51% for me, 49% for her, a division that recognized her crucial participation while preserving my final control over important decisions. The contract, carefully reviewed by my lawyer, included protection clauses for both parties and a gradual succession plan. "In 5 years, if all goes well, you'll have the option to buy another 20%, I explained as we signed the documents. "Eventually, this place will be more yours than mine, and that's okay. It's as it should be." "I'll never change the name," she promised. "It will always be Linda's Sweets, even when you're retired on some beach." I laughed at the thought. Retired again. "No, thank you. I'd rather keep doing what I love until I can't hold a spoon." But her words planted a seed. Not about retirement after decades of working to survive, I now worked for pleasure and purpose, but about the more distant future, about what would remain after I was no longer here. In the following weeks, I began a project I had postponed for a long time, formally documenting all the family's traditional recipes along with the stories behind them. Not just the culinary techniques, but the memories, the contexts, the people who had passed them down. My grandmother making custard tarts in the tiny kitchen of the apartment in the suburbs, my mother preparing coconut flans to sell in the neighborhood during hard times, myself, young and inexperienced, learning by trial and error. Teresa convinced me to turn that project into a real book. "It's not just a recipe book," she insisted. "It's a memoir, a piece of cultural history, a document of female resilience." The idea seemed too grand for me, but the seed was planted. On a quiet afternoon, while organizing old photographs to include in the book, I received an unexpected call. It was Amanda, the manager from the bank where it all began 4 years ago, when I discovered David's first unauthorized withdrawals. "Mrs. Linda," she said, sounding cheerful. "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "Of course I remember you, Amanda," I interrupted with a smile. How could I forget the person who helped me regain my financial independence? She laughed. "I'm glad I had that impact. Actually, I'm calling because I have a slightly unusual request. We're organizing a series of talks on financial literacy for women, especially older women, and I would love for you to share your story." The proposal took me completely by surprise. "Me? Give a talk, Amanda? I'm just a baker." "You are so much more than that," she replied firmly. "You are an example of resilience, of courage, of reinvention. Your story could inspire other women who are facing similar situations. Financial abuse, exploitation by family members, the feeling that it's too late to start over." I fell silent, considering her words. I had never thought of my personal experience as something that could have value to people other than myself. "You don't have to answer now," Amanda continued. "Think about it. It would just be an informal chat with a small group, nothing intimidating." "I'll think about it," I promised before hanging up. In the days that followed, the idea of sharing my story publicly stayed with me, growing in appeal. I talked about it with Julia, with Teresa, even with David during one of our cautious conversations. "You should do it," David said, surprising me with his immediate support. "Your story is powerful, Mom, and unfortunately what happened between us isn't as unusual as it should be." The sincerity of that acknowledgement, the fact that he didn't try to minimize or justify his past actions, meant more to me than any apology. I accepted Amanda's invitation. The first talk would be for a small group, just 15 women, most over 60. I prepared meticulously, writing notes, organizing my thoughts, trying to decide how much to share, how to find the balance between honesty and overexposure. The night before the talk, I called David. I don't know exactly why, maybe seeking some kind of permission, some confirmation that I was doing the right thing by turning our private history into something public. "I'm going to talk about what happened between us tomorrow," I said directly, "at an event at the bank." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "I understand," he finally replied. "You have every right." "I'm not going to use your name," I clarified. "It's not about exposing you or punishing you. It's about helping other people." "Thank you for that," he said, gratitude evident in his voice. "But even if you did use my name, you'd only be telling the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts, but that doesn't make it any less necessary." Bang. Those words stayed with me the next morning as I walked into the small meeting room at the bank. 15 women were waiting for me, some looking curious, others cautious, all with their own untold stories written on their faces. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice trembling at first. "My name is Linda. I'm 69 years old, and 4 years ago I discovered that my son was systematically stealing from me." The words flowed more easily after that. I told them everything: the unauthorized withdrawals, the fraudulent credit card, the attempt to take complete control of my finances. I told them about selling the furniture, the confrontation, the legal process. And I told them about the aftermath, starting over the sweet shop, the rediscovery of purpose and identity. As I spoke, I saw tears in the eyes of some women, nods of recognition from others. I realized that my story, however personal, was also universal. Many there had experienced some version of what I went through, perhaps not with children, but with husbands, siblings, sons-in-law. The dynamic was the same: the abuse of trust exploitation disguised as care, the struggle to regain autonomy. At the end, a lady in the front row raised her hand. Her face was marked by decades of life, but her eyes shone with intensity. "How did you find the courage?" she asked. "How did you overcome the fear of being alone, of losing your son forever?" The question hit me in the soul. It was exactly what I would have asked myself 4 years ago if I were sitting in that room listening to another woman tell a story like mine. The courage didn't come all at once, I answered honestly. It came in small steps. It came when I realized that I was already alone, even with my son in my life, that relationship was based on exploitation, not true love. I paused, searching for the right words. And as for the fear of losing my son, I discovered that what I was really afraid of losing never existed in the way I imagined. The son I thought I had, the one who loved me unconditionally, the one who would care for me in my old age, that was an illusion I had created myself. I took a deep breath before continuing. The paradox is that by pulling away, by setting clear boundaries, by demanding respect, I created space for a new, healthier relationship. Not with the imaginary son who never existed, but with the real man he is, with all his flaws and potential for growth. The woman nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Other hands went up, other questions came. I was surprised by my own clarity, the confidence with which I spoke about topics that once caused me so much shame and confusion. When the session ended, several women came up to briefly share their own stories, to thank me, to ask for advice. Amanda watched it all with a satisfied smile. "That was powerful," she said when the last participant had left. "More powerful than I expected. Would you mind doing it again, maybe for a larger group?" I looked at her, feeling a mix of emotional exhaustion and deep satisfaction. Yes, I replied. I think I would do it again. I left the bank that afternoon with a new understanding of what I had accomplished in recent years. It wasn't just a thriving business financial independence, a renewed identity. It was also a voice, a story that could reach other people, a legacy that went beyond recipes and culinary techniques. In the months that followed, I gave more talks at banks, community centers, retiree associations, always with the same central message. It's never too late to reclaim your power, to set healthy boundaries, to start over. The book I had started as a simple documentation of family recipes evolved into something broader. A mix of memoir recipes and reflections on motherhood, aging, and late-life self-discovery. Sweet Lessons: Recipes for Starting Over. It was published on my 70th birthday, a gift I gave to myself. On the day of the launch, a small local bookstore hosted an event. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few loyal customers from the shop, some friends, Julia and the team. I was stunned to find the bookstore completely packed with people even waiting on the sidewalk. In the crowd, I saw familiar and unfamiliar faces. Teresa was there, of course, along with other local merchants who had become friends. Julia and the shop employees, all wearing T-shirts with the Linda's Sweets logo. Women who had attended my talks, some bringing friends or family. And there in the back, almost hidden, was David. Next to him, Marianne held Sophia's hand. My son hadn't confirmed he would be there, and his unexpected appearance moved me more than I wanted to admit. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at that room full of people who in some way had become part of my story. People who helped me rebuild, who witnessed my transformation, who believed in me when I doubted myself. At 65, I began, I thought my life was practically over, that my only remaining role was to be an increasingly invisible mother, an increasingly disposable old woman. I was wrong. I ran my fingers over the cover of the book, feeling the texture under my wrinkled skin, hands that now told stories of work creation, love, and pain. This book isn't just about sweets, although they are delicious. I continued, drawing laughter from the audience. It's about transforming bitterness into sweetness, about reclaiming life's ingredients that were taken from us and creating something new, something entirely our own. My eyes briefly met David's. There was no accusation in my gaze, no guilt in his. Just a mutual recognition of a shared journey, even though we had walked on opposite sides of the path for a long time. Sometimes the most important lessons come late in life, I continued, and sometimes the greatest betrayals can lead to the most profound liberations. I'm not grateful for the pain, but I am grateful for the growth that came after it. Sophia nodded enthusiastically from the back of the room, completely oblivious to the deeper context of my words. Just happy to see her grandmother being celebrated. I nodded back, smiling. This book is a legacy, I concluded, not just for my granddaughter or for future generations of my family, but for anyone who believes it's too late to change, to grow, to flourish. It is never too late to discover who you really are beyond the roles you've played for others. When I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People lined up for me to sign their copies of the book. Each person had a kind word, a personal story to share, a connection to make. David waited until the line dwindled to approach Sophia, bouncing by his side. "That was beautiful, Mom," he said simply. "I'm proud of you. I really am." The words could have sounded like the old manipulations, but they didn't. There was a sincerity in his voice that couldn't be faked. "Thank you for coming," I replied. "It means a lot to me." Sophia jumped onto my lap, asking for her own autographed book. "This one is special." I told her, writing a personal dedication, for when you're older and want to know your grandma better. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stayed behind in the bookstore with the owner helping to arrange the chairs. He commented on what a success the event had been, how he rarely saw so many people so emotionally invested in a launch. "You touched something deep in people," he observed, "something beyond food or family stories." I nodded, understanding what he meant. I had touched upon the universality of the human struggle for dignity, for respect, for self-determination, on the possibility of starting over regardless of age or circumstance. Walking home that night under the starry sky of the city that had truly become my own, I reflected on the journey of the last few years. From the woman who allowed herself to be exploited to the woman who now inspired others to free themselves. From the mother who lived only through her son to the complex, multifaceted human being I had become. At 70, my life wasn't ending. As I once feared, it was flourishing in ways I never imagined possible. The path had not been easy. The pain of betrayal, the struggle to rebuild the complicated relationships that remained in constant negotiation. None of that could be romanticized or simplified, but there was beauty in that complexity. There was wisdom in the scar. There was sweetness in even the most bitter of lessons. Arriving home, I placed my personal copy of the book on the shelf next to my bed. Beside it, a recent photo. Me, Sophia, and David in the shop's kitchen, all in aprons and with smiling, chocolate-smeared faces. A new memory being built, a new chapter being written. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale happy ending. It was something more real, more valuable, a continuous beginning, a constant reinvention, a legacy not just of sweets but of dignity, courage, and the relentless determination to live fully on my own terms until the very last moment. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll see you there.